I didn't think grief could grow roots in your spine. But after my mom passed, I walked like something heavy had fused itself into my bones. She died 2 years ago, and still there were days I reached for my phone to text her. Some part of me hadn't caught up, or maybe I just didn't want it to. She wasn't just my mom, she was my best friend, my biggest supporter, the only person who ever really saw me without filters or expectations. When she was gone, the silence felt louder than anything I'd ever heard. Have you ever lost someone so important that every joy afterward feels like it's missing a corner? That's how I felt when I got engaged to Natalie. Happy, but hollow. Not because I didn't love her, I did. At least I thought I did. Every milestone without my mom felt like it came with an asterisk. The engagement, the venue visits, the cake tastings. She was missing from every photo, every decision. It made the joy harder to hold. And still, I kept going. I told myself Mom would have wanted me to move forward, to build something, to be loved. So I gave Natalie my heart. I gave her my time, my trust, my plans for the future. What I didn't know then was this: not everyone who says I love you understands what that really means when you re-grieving. I met Natalie a few months after Mom passed. We were both at a mutual friend's birthday party, and she walked in wearing a yellow sundress and a laugh that made people turn their heads. She was charm and confidence, all wrapped in elegance. Everyone in the room wanted her attention, and somehow she gave it to me. We talked for hours that night, about books, music, travel. I told her I'd just lost someone important, and she nodded with quiet sympathy. "I'm so sorry," she said, touching my arm. She didn't press, didn't pry. She made me feel safe. Isn't that how it usually starts? With someone saying all the right things before you learn what they really think when no one else is watching? The first few months were great. She was attentive, sweet, interested in everything I did. She asked about my mom once or twice, and when I told her how close we were, she smiled and said she raised a good man. It felt genuine. Later, when I brought Natalie home to meet my dad and Antha, only 2 family members I had left, she charmed them. My dad was reserved, but he warmed up. My aunt, who always had an eye for red flags, said she seemed a little polished, but I brushed it off. "Isn't that a good thing?" I asked. She shrugged. "Sometimes polish hides the rust." I wish I'd listened to that warning. Natalie's parents, on the other hand, were ... different. They were wealthy, old school, and had an air of polite superiority that clung to every conversation. The first time I met them, her mother complimented my watch and then asked what I did to afford something so tasteful. Her father made jokes about raising the bar for the family genes. I laughed at the time, nervously. Natalie just rolled her eyes and said, "They don't mean anything by it." And because I wanted to believe that, I let it go. Again and again, I let it go. The closer we got to the wedding, the more I noticed at little comments, weird jokes, moments that didn't sit right. Like the time Natalie's mom asked if I planned to put your mom Essern on the head table, or just leave her in the buffet line. Then she laughed and said she was just kidding. Or when her dad said, "You re-lucky your mom, ice and tea around to see how much we spent on these invitations." I didn't laugh that time, but Natalie always stepped in. "They're just teasing," she'd say. "You're being too sensitive." Was I? Have you ever been surrounded by people who made you feel foolish for feeling hurt? That's how it started, the gaslighting, the slow unraveling of my own instincts. But at that point, the deposits were paid. The venue was booked, and Natalie still looked at me like she loved me. So I stayed. I convinced myself I was just overreacting. That grief made me too raw, too reactive. That once the wedding was done, things would settle. I'd see who I was, and things would get better. I didn't know the worst was still coming, and it would come when I least expected it, when my guard was down, surrounded by friends, family, and the echo of my mother's absence. It would come at the rehearsal dinner, and it would change everything. The night before our wedding was supposed to be one of celebration. A soft, golden pause before the big day. One last evening to soak in love, family, and laughter. That is what I told myself as I straightened my tie and looked at my reflection in the hotel room mirror, but deep down, I felt it something off. A quiet tension that clung to my shoulders like humidity. I couldn't name it then. I just knew something wasn't sitting right inside me. Natalie had spent the entire day obsessing over tiny details. She wanted the rehearsal dinner to feel tasteful but not stiff. Her words, So we ended up at a chic restaurant downtown, the kind with candles that burned low and menus that used words like infused and reduction. Looked perfect. But perfect has a way of hiding what's rotten underneath. The room filled with people I cared about. My friends from college, my dad, my aunt, a few coworkers, some of Natalie's extended family I'd met maybe once or twice, and, of course, her parents dressed to the nines, floating around like they were hosting a gala. I tried to shake the nerves, smiled through greetings, clapped people on the back, made small talk over drinks, but grief has a way of pulling up a chair, even when it's not invited. Everything about that night reminded me that someone was missing. My mom would have loved this room. She would have found a way to make it feel warmer, less staged. She would have pulled my dad into a corner and teased him until he laughed. She would have hugged Natalie even if she had doubts and whispered, "Take care of him." And she would have looked at me with that knowing glance, the one that said, "You've got this, son. I see you." But instead, all I had was a folded photo of her in my jacket pocket and an ache in my chest that wouldn't quit. When it came time for toasts, I braced myself. Natalie's dad went first. He tapped his glass and cleared his throat. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "we're gathered here to celebrate the union of two families." "Well, one family and one Lone Ranger? Really?" Laughter rippled through the room. My smile froze. "I mean, we all know Natalie comes from a long line of loud, opinionated, charming folks," he said. "Then there's our future son-in-law, whose mother, may she rest, apparently taught him the fine art of disappearing at family events." A few more chuckles. Natalie giggled. My stomach twisted. She always seemed a little reserved, he continued. But I guess she did something right. Look how polite he turned out. He raised his glass. "To quiet mothers and daughters who bring balance." The room clinked glasses. I didn't move. Had I really just heard that? Was I imagining things? Or did this man just mock the woman who raised me who had passed, who couldn't defend herself in front of a room full of people? I looked at Natalie. She was smiling, not politely, genuinely, like her father had just delivered a delightful punchline at a cocktail party. She didn't flinch, didn't look at me, didn't reach for my hand. She just clinked her glass and took a sip. And in that moment, I felt like I was watching a play I hadn't auditioned for. Have you ever sat in a room full of laughter and felt like the only person drowning? My aunt leaned over and whispered, "Do you want to leave?" I shook my head. Not yet. Maybe it would stop. Maybe someone else would say something kind, balance it out. Maybe this was just a one-off, an awkward joke gone wrong. Then Natalie's mother stood up. "Oh, come on now. Don't be so serious," she said. "You know what they say, Griff? Makes people sensitive." I stared at her. She looked straight at me and smiled. "But I'm sure your mother would have loved Natalie," she added, voice syrupy. "Ow!" After all, what better legacy than marrying up? The room didn't laugh this time. It went quiet. Too quiet. I stood. I didn't make a speech. I didn't shout. Didn't throw a glass or storm out. I just stood. Because I knew if I sat in that chair 1 second longer, I would shatter. I met Natalie's eyes. Still no apology, no recognition, just a flicker of annoyance. Like I was the one ruining the mood. So I walked out of the room, down the hallway, through the hotel lobby, into the night. I didn't cry. I couldn't. I just walked around the block, breathing like I'd just come up from underwater, trying to make sense of what had happened. Had they really just mocked my mother? At my wedding rehearsal? Did Natalie really laugh? And what kind of people did that? What kind of person stayed after that? Here's the thing. Grief isn't just sadness. It's a mirror. It shows you who's standing with you and who's only pretending to. And that night I saw clearly. I was alone. When I got back to the hotel room, Natalie was waiting. Arms crossed, pout on her lips. "Where did you go?" she asked, like I'd stepped out during a movie intermission. "You laughed," I said. She rolled her eyes. "Oh my God, are we still on this? They mocked my mother. They were joking. That's what people do at rehearsal dinners, not about the dead. Why do you always have to be so dramatic?" That word again. Dramatic, sensitive, overreacting. I felt my chest tighten. I took a deep breath. "I'm calling it off," I said. She blinked. What? I'm not marrying into a family that laughs at my grief. It turns my mother into a punchline. You're seriously doing this? The night before the wedding? Yes. She laughed. Not kindly. Not nervously. Mockingly. Wow, you're really making this about you, huh? No, I said. You already did that. And I walked out again. This time, for good. I didn't sleep that night. Not even a little. I sat on the edge of a friend's couch in a downtown apartment. One that still smelled faintly of incense, an old takeout, staring at the blank screen of my phone for hours. No texts from Natalie. No missed calls. No angry messages from her parents. Only silence, which somehow stung even more than the laughter had. It was like they didn't care I'd left. Or worse, they expected I'd come crawling back. Isn't that what people like them believe? That the show must go on, no matter who bleeds backstage? The apartment belonged to Daniel, my oldest friend. The kind who doesn't flinch when you show up at 1 a.m. with nothing but your keys and your broken heart. He didn't ask questions. Just tossed me a blanket and said, crash as long as you need. Kitchen's open. The next morning, he slid a cup of coffee into my hand and finally said, you want to tell me what happened? I took a long sip, let the heat settle in my chest. They made jokes about my mom, I said quietly. At the rehearsal dinner, in front of everyone, Daniel blinked. What? Yeah, her dad, then her mom. About how my mom was quiet and grief makes people sensitive. Like my love for her was a weakness. Jesus. And Natalie laughed. He set his mug down with a thud. Did you tell her how messed up that was? I didn't have to. She knew. She just didn't care. He ran a hand through his hair. And you walked out? I called off the wedding. Good. I looked at him. No hesitation. I asked. None, he said. You're the only one who's ever honored your grief. It's the only one who never made a joke out of it. Why would you marry someone who treats it like a punchline? I didn't realize how much I needed to hear that until he said it. Still, the fallout came fast. By noon, word had spread. Natalie posted a cryptic Instagram story, just her, sipping a mimosa in a silk robe. The caption: some people can't handle real life. Few of our mutual friends texted, asking if everything was okay. One even said, you can still fix it. Cold feet is normal. Cold feet. I wasn't nervous about commitment. I was appalled by cruelty. There's a difference. That afternoon, my dad called. He'd been quiet since the rehearsal dinner, standing in the back, eyes like steel, saying nothing but seeing everything. I answered on the first ring. I heard, he said. Yeah, good. It surprised me. I thought you might be disappointed. He sighed. I watched that dinner like I was watching a movie I couldn't turn off. And I thought about your mother the whole time, if she'd been there. He paused. She would have flipped the table, I said, half laughing. Exactly, he replied. And she would have told you to run. So I'm telling you for her. You did the right thing. I pressed the phone tighter to my ear, feeling his words land somewhere deep. Thanks, Dad. Always. A few days passed. The wedding was officially canceled. Vendors were notified. Deposits were forfeited. Gifts returned. Guests refunded. And Natalie, she'd never once called. Not to explain, not to apologize, not to ask. Just disappeared. She told me everything I needed to know. Because when someone can laugh at your pain and never even attempt to make it right, they were never in love with you. They were in love with how you made them feel. And once you stop serving that role, they vanish. I kept thinking back to the moment I first told Natalie about my mom. It was on our third date. We were sitting in a tiny Vietnamese place, slurping noodles and swapping childhood stories. She asked if my mom was nearby, and I told her the truth. How I lost her, how it broke me. How I hadn't really been the same since. She reached across the table and touched my hand. That must have been so hard, she'd said. But now, I realized her empathy was a performance, practiced move. The kind of thing people like her say when they want to look kind without actually doing the work of being kind. Daniel and I sat on his balcony that night, watching the sun dip below the city skyline. You okay? He asked. I shrugged. I thought I'd feel worse. Do you not really? I feel clearer. He nodded. Breakups don't always feel like heartache. Sometimes they feel like release, like coming up for air. Exactly. I leaned back in the chair. You think I'll ever find someone who gets it? I asked. Who understands grief? Who does in tea make me feel like my love for my mom is something I have to shrink? He looked at me, steady. Yes, he said, because now you won't settle for anything less. That weekend, I visited my mom's grave. It had been a while, too long. I brought fresh peonies, her favorite, and a thermos of coffee. I sat beside her for hours, telling her everything. The dinner, the jokes, Natalie's laugh, calling it off, choosing myself. And softly, I hope you're proud. Hey. The wind rustled through the trees, gentle and constant. And for the first time in months, I felt her. Not in the way people write about in books, but in a quiet calm that settled in my chest. A whisper beneath the noise. Yes, I'm proud. And that was enough. More than enough. I didn't need a ring to prove I was loved. I didn't need a wedding to feel whole. I had walked away from a room full of people who laughed at my pain. I hadn't looked back, because some vows are meant to be broken before they ever reach the altar. Especially the ones you make to betray yourself. There's a moment after a storm, when the sky isn't quite clear, but the worst has passed, where everything feels still in a strange way. Like the world is holding its breath, waiting to see what you'll do next. That's how the week after the canceled wedding felt. Not dramatic. No, not chaotic. Just still. People stopped texting. Natalie didn't reach out. Vendors stopped calling. It was as if the whole thing had never been planned in the first place. Like all those months, those dinners, tastings, fittings, and flights were just a dream I'd woken up from. And somehow, I didn't feel lost. I felt anchored. Because while they'd erased me from their narrative, I'd rewritten my own. I went back to work the following Monday. My coworkers, thankfully, had tacked. They didn't bombard me with questions. A few offered soft nods or left coffee on my desk. My boss pulled me aside briefly and said, "You don't owe anyone a story. Just take the time you need." That was the thing about grief. It doesn't care about perfect timing. It just shows up, uninvited, unapologetic. And it brings friends, clarity, courage, and sometimes the strength to walk away from people who claim to love you, but only on their terms. 3 days after I returned to work, I got an email from Natalie. Subject line, "We should talk." No greeting, no apology. Just a 5-sentence message that said she still thought I was overreacting, but maybe we could get closure if I was willing to be civil. Civil. As if civility had been the issue. Not cruelty. Not mockery. It's not the way she watched her parents gut my mother's memory like it was entertainment. I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I hit delete. Because closure doesn't come from the person who broke you. It comes from choosing not to let them do it again. That weekend, I visited my dad. We sat in the garage, where he still kept all my mom's gardening tools neatly hung on the wall, untouched. He had her radio going, the one that only played 80s rock and gospel, always switching without warning. "You okay?" he asked, not looking at me, just sipping his beer. "Yeah," I said. "Actually, yeah," he nodded. "You want to talk about it?" I paused. Then she laughed. "Dad, at the dinner?" "Yeah." When her dad said Mom was too quiet. When her mom called me sensitive, Natalie laughed. It's like it was all just part of the show. He didn't speak right away. Then he said, "Your mother would have hated that." "I know." She was quiet, he added, a little smile tugging at his lips. But she wasn't weak. Not even close. He set his beer down, and neither are you. It was the first time since I'd walked out that someone had said that to me, and it meant more than I could explain. After that, I started writing again. Not just journaling, real writing. Stories, essays, reflections on love, grief, and the strange ways people show you who they really are when your guard is down. One of the essays I wrote was called "Laughing at the Dead." I didn't name names. I didn't need to. The story was raw and true and mine. I submitted it anonymously to an online magazine that specialized in grief writing. 2 weeks later, they published it. The response was overwhelming. Hundreds of comments, dozens of emails, people sharing their own stories of being mocked, misunderstood, or minimized in their grief. It was like I had given language to something many of us had felt but hadn't known how to say. And in doing so, I felt something shift in me again. Because pain doesn't always disappear. Sometimes it just becomes a bridge. One of the emails I got stood out. It was from a woman named Clara. She wrote, "Thank you. Left a man who told me I was too emotional for crying over my dad. Reading your piece made me feel like I wasn't crazy. I read that line over and over. You're not crazy. Neither was I weeks past. The wedding that never happened faded into memory. I donated the suit, canceled the honeymoon trip, tossed the RSVP cards that had never been mailed back, and I finally returned the locket. It was my mom's, a simple silver piece with a tiny photo of her and me tucked inside. I'd planned to sew it into my tux jacket, right above my heart, so she could be with me on the day. But Natalie had taken it, said she wanted to honor my mom by including it in her bouquet. Sounded sweet at the time, thoughtful even, but she never asked, never give it back. After the breakup, I'd asked for it once, through a text. She ignored it, but now it showed up at my door in a bubble-wrapped envelope. No note, just the locket, cold and still shining, like it had waited patiently for my return. I held it for a long time, then I opened it. My mom's smile stared back at me. I let the first time in weeks, I let the tears come. Not because I was broken, but because I had held myself together for so long, I forgot what it felt like to simply release. I wore the locket around my neck for the next few days, not as decoration, as armor. A reminder that I came from someone strong, someone kind, someone who would have never laughed at another person's pain. That Friday, I took the day off work and drove to the coast. Mom loved the ocean, said it made her feel small in a good way, like the world was big enough to hold her sadness without judgment. I stood at the edge of the water, letting the waves kiss my shoes, and said out loud, "Thank you for raising me right, for making me soft, for teaching me that grief isn't weakness and neither is walking away." I pressed the locket to my chest and smiled, because I wasn't grieving a lost wedding. I was honoring a love story that started long before Natalie ever entered the picture. The one between a mother and a son. A bond made not of rings or promises, but of truth. And that bond, it had never once made me feel small. I always thought the hardest part would be leaving, walking away from Natalie, canceling everything, watching the future I'd planned to burn down to ash. But it wasn't. The hardest part was what came after the days when everything should have felt better, but somehow didn't. Not at first. It's strange how even after you make the right decision, your body still holds the tension, the what-ifs, the muscle memory of compromise. It wasn't love I missed. It was routine. The comfort of believing in something, even if that belief was slowly killing me. Have you ever felt lonely in your own healing? People think strength means bouncing back fast, smiling, getting back out there. But for me, strength was quieter, more subtle. It was sitting alone in my apartment and not reaching for my phone to text Natalie. It was choosing not to explain myself to people who never really knew the whole story. It was learning to be still with the silence and trust that it wasn't a punishment. Some nights were harder than others. I'd hear a song we used to dance to in the kitchen, or pass by the bakery where we used to split raspberry croissants on Sundays. And for a second, it would all rush back. But then I'd breathe, remind myself. I didn't walk away because I stopped loving her. I walked away because I started loving myself more. One afternoon, I met up with my aunt for coffee. She had been one of the few people who saw through the shine from the beginning, the one who'd said polish can hide the rust. She hugged me tight, then pulled back and said, "You look different." "Different how?" I asked. "Lighter?" We sat down, and she ordered her usual black coffee, no sugar. I added cream to mine, trying to find the right words to explain the past few weeks. I thought it would feel like failure, I admitted, was calling it off. "What you did was brave. You stopped the cycle before it could sink deeper." I looked at her. "Why didn't I see it sooner?" "You did," she said. "But love makes us soft in places. We should be sharp." That hit me, because it was true. I'd bent myself into a version of what Natalie wanted is going, accommodating, quiet about my grief, and she'd taken my softness and mistaken it for weakness. Never again. That night, I opened a new document on my laptop and started writing a list. Things I will not shrink for. My grief, my love for my mother, my boundaries, my vorse, my worth. It was in tea poetry. Just truth. But it felt like something I could build on. Days turned into weeks. The season changed. A spring slipped toward summer. The lights stayed longer in the sky, and my chest felt less heavy each morning. Daniel introduced me to a friend of his, Jenna. We grabbed coffee once. She was kind, funny, loved dogs and read poetry. Oh, she. Asked about the canceled wedding, and I told her the short version. She didn't flinch, didn't offer pity. She just said, "That must have been really hard. I'm glad you walked away. It wasn't love, but it was nice. Out. And for now, nice was enough." One Saturday, I visited a grief group my therapist had recommended months ago. I'd ignored it back then, thinking I didn't need it. But something told me to go now, because I was falling apart, but because I was finally ready to be seen in the aftermath. There were 7 of us. Different ages. Different losses. Same ache. We sat in a circle, no Kleenex in sight. Just real people trying to piece together what comes after. When it was my turn, I said, "I left someone who made fun of my mom. I thought I'd never recover. But now I'm learning grief doesn't make you weak. It teaches you how to stop lying to yourself." Someone across the circle nodded, and in that moment, I knew I wasn't alone. The next week, I got a card in the mail. No name on the return address. Just elegant handwriting on the envelope. Inside was a note. "I was at your rehearsal dinner. I wanted to say something, but I didn't. I should have. I'm sorry, you did the right thing." I didn't know who Elle was. Maybe a cousin of Natalie's, maybe a guest from work. It didn't matter. What mattered was this. Even in that room of laughter and cruelty, someone had seen me. And they carried it too. Grief doesn't vanish. It evolves. It stops screaming and starts whispering. And sometimes it reminds you not of what you've lost, but of what you've gained by letting go of what never deserved you. I thought I needed closure. But what I really needed was clarity. Natalie never tried to understand me. Her family never respected me. And somewhere in that mess, I found the version of me who does. I went back to the beach one evening. Same place I had taken my mom's locket. I stood at the edge of the water again, waves lapping at my feet. This time, I didn't speak. I just stood there, letting the wind move through me, letting the salt in the air sting a little less. And for the first time since the day she died, I didn't feel her absence like a wound. I felt her presence like a guide, still with me, still proud. And I realized I wasn't just healing, I was becoming. Not the groom who walked away from the altar, but the man who finally chose himself. I used to think closure came like a bolt of lightning, loud, sudden, irreversible. But it doesn't. Closure is slow, quiet. It doesn't knock, doesn't ask for permission. Sometimes it arrives on a Tuesday morning when you're refolding laundry and realize you haven't thought about them in days. Or in the middle of your commute. When the song that once made you cry now barely makes you blink. That's what it felt like one morning when I walked into the cafe I used to go to with Natalie and didn't feel the urge to turn around. No tension.
Oh.
No nostalgia. Just a place with good coffee and bad parking. And I realized this is what healing feels like. Not perfect, but possible. Life didn't rush to reward me for walking away. There was no new romance waiting, no karmic jackpot, no magical transformation. But what I did get was something better. Peace. It started small, waking up without the weight of pretending, laughing with friends, and realizing it wasn't forced. Standing in the mirror and seeing someone I respected looking back. It was the kind of peace I didn't even know I'd been starved for. Because when you're constantly shrinking to fit into someone else's world, you don't notice how cramped you've become. Until one day, you stretch, and you realize how much space you were always meant to take up. Around that time, I reconnected with Claire, the woman who'd emailed me after my essay got published. We met up for coffee at a bookstore cafe, halfway between our neighborhoods. She was even warmer in person, sharp, kind eyes. A laugh that felt like home. We talked about everything: grief, healing, bad engagements, how people treat you when you're broken. She told me about her dad, how she'd sat alone at his funeral because her boyfriend at the time was in tea, good with sad things. How that moment had cracked her open. "I thought I was being too much," she said. "But it turns out I was just with someone who was too little." That sentence stayed with me, because I'd spent so long feeling like I was the problem. Too sensitive, too emotional, too stuck in the past. But now I could see the truth. I was never too much. They were just too unwilling to sit in the discomfort of real love. Claire and I didn't date not then. We exchanged books. We swapped playlists. We sent each other texts that started with "You'll appreciate this," It ended with memes, quotes, or random thoughts about grief and resilience. It was a friendship built on honesty. Honestly, it was one of the most healing things I'd experienced. Because she didn't try to fix me. She just sat with me in the places that had been ignored. And in doing so, helped me remember that I wasn't broken. I was just still unfolding. One evening, I got a message from Natalie. Weeks had passed since her last attempt at closure. I almost didn't open it, but curiosity got the best of me. It was short, cold, a single sentence. I hope you're happy now. There was no name, no sign-off, just that. I stared at it for a while, then I deleted it. Not because I was angry, but because I didn't owe that version of me or her anything anymore. I started writing more, about the quiet victories, the slow return to myself, the parts of grief people don't talk about, the guilt that lingers after choosing yourself, even when it was the only choice that made sense. My next piece was titled, Choosing Peace Over Permission. It went viral. Hundreds of thousands of views. Emails from people who had walked away from families, friendships, careers, and relationships that tried to silence them. One person wrote, "Thank you for showing me that leaving isn't giving up, it's growing up." Another said, "I called off my wedding today. You gave me the courage I couldn't find on my own." I cried reading those messages, because I had once searched for that kind of validation too. And now, unknowingly, I'd become it for someone else. Clara came to one of my readings. It was a small event at a library downtown. I read an essay about my mom, how she used to leave notes in my lunchbox, always signed with a doodle of a flower. How I used to toss them when I was 13, too embarrassed to let anyone see, but now I'd give anything to find one more. Afterward, Clara came up to me, eyes glistening. "She would have loved that," she said. "She would have loved you," I replied. It slipped out. But it didn't feel wrong. She smiled, didn't flinch. Just reached out and held my hand for a second longer than usual. We didn't rush into anything. But slowly, something shifted. Our conversations grew softer. Our hugs lingered. One night, we watched a storm from her balcony and didn't speak for an hour. Just sat there, breathing the same quiet air, letting the world be loud so we didn't have to be. Me. This was the kind of love my mother would have wanted for me. Not flashy, not performative, just safe, steady, real. The kind where no one laughs at your scars. They kiss them. One morning I went back to the beach. This time Clara came with me. We walked barefoot through the sand, the ocean humming beside us like a memory that never ends. I showed her the spot where I'd stood with my mom's locket. She didn't ask questions. She just stood beside me, silent and sure. And I realized DAs hadn't replaced the love I lost. I'd simply made room for something new, something that could sit beside the grief without trying to erase it. Before we left, I knelt in the sand and wrote my mom's name with a stick. Then I wrote mine, and below it a single word. Still here, because I was, not just surviving anymore, living, loving, becoming, and above all, else finally free. Grief doesn't disappear, just gets quieter. It stops waking you up in the middle of the night. Stops following you into grocery stores and whispering in your ear while you're choosing cereal. It doesn't scream anymore. It sighs. It lingers at the edges, waiting patiently, like a dog that used to bark, but now just rests at your feet. That's what I had come to understand. Nearly a year after calling off the wedding, I wasn't trying to move on anymore. That phrase had always felt like an insult anyway, like you were supposed to abandon something sacred just because time had passed. I wasn't over it. I had simply grown around it. My writing was steady now. I had a column on a growing website focused on emotional healing, relationships, and resilience. Each week I shared thoughts on navigating love and loss and the strange, tender places in between. It felt good to put language to the things that had once crushed me in silence. Sometimes I'd get messages from readers who'd gone through similar things: canceled weddings, complicated grief, families that didn't understand them. They called me brave, but I never really felt brave. I just felt like someone who got tired of pretending. One email in particular stopped me cold. It was from a woman named Teresa. Her subject line, "Your story saved me." In her message, she wrote that she'd gone through a very similar situation: rehearsal dinner, mockery, silence from the person who was supposed to defend her. She had watched my reading online and called off her wedding the next day. "I thought I'd be humiliated," she wrote, "but instead I felt free. I wanted you to know that freedom started with your voice. I closed my laptop and just sat there. Not because I was overwhelmed, but because I was finally beginning to understand that my pain hadn't been wasted. It had become something more. It had become a map. Clara and I kept growing closer. There was no rush between us, no pressure to define things in a way that made others comfortable. We had our own rhythm. A quiet one, gentle, but unshakable. She never tried to take away my grief. She just stood beside it. Sometimes that's all love needs to be. One afternoon, we sat at my kitchen table, eating takeout Thai food from mismatched containers. Clara looked up from her noodles and asked, "Do you ever think about what you would have said if you'd stayed?" I smiled. "I think about it all the time," I said. She leaned in, curious. "What would you have said?" I wiped my hands on a napkin and exhaled slowly. Probably something like, "Love isn't about surviving someone else's jokes. It's about being protected, even in a room full of people who don't understand you." Clara nodded. That would have been a hell of a vow. "Yeah," I said. "Too bad it was wasted on the wrong crowd." She laughed, and I laughed with her, and quieter. "But maybe it wasn't wasted." "What do you mean? You said it, didn't you?" "Just not on a stage." I looked at her, and I understood, because she was right. I had said my vows to myself. When I walked out of that room, when I stood by the ocean, when I chose silence over rage, when I chose truth over pretending, I'd already made the most important vow of my life. I will not betray myself just to make others comfortable. A few weeks later, I was invited to speak at a local storytelling event. The theme was turning points. I hesitated at first, unsure if I wanted to bring that chapter of my life into the spotlight again. But something inside me, stronger now, firmer, told me it mattered. So I said yes. The event was held in a cozy performance space downtown, exposed brick. Soft lights, maybe 30 people in the audience. Not a massive crowd, but enough to make your hands tremble if you weren't ready. I stood on stage, a single mic in front of me. And I told the story, not just of the dinner, but of my mother. Of what love is supposed to feel like. Of the cruelty masked as comedy. Of the silence that was louder than the insult. I told them about walking away, about standing on the beach with a locket and no answers, about finding myself not in revenge but in reflection. I ended with this. Sometimes the bravest thing you will ever do is say nothing in a room full of people who expect you to stay, and then leave, and never look back. When I stepped off the stage, the room didn't explode with applause. It went silent, the best way. The kind of silence that feels sacred. The kind that happens when something lands deep. Afterward, an older woman came up to me. She had gray hair and a loose bun, and a scarf that looked like it had stories of its own. She took my hand and said, "I waited 30 years to leave a man who made me feel small. You did it before you ever said I do. That's power." I nodded, eyes stinging. "Thank you," I whispered. But what I really wanted to say was, "Thank you, Mom, for teaching me love that didn't ask me to shrink, for giving me the courage to walk away, for staying with me, even now." Clara met me outside, her eyes shining. "You were incredible," she said. I shrugged, suddenly shy. I just told the truth. She took my hand. And sometimes, that's the most powerful story there is. That night, I lay in bed, the city quiet around me. For the first time in a long, long while, I didn't feel like I was healing. I felt like I was whole. Not because I had someone, but because I had me. And that was the love story I never saw coming. Some people think love ends when the relationship does. That once the ring comes off or the door closes, that's it. The love dies, disappears, fades like fog in the morning sun. But that's not how it worked for me. Love didn't die. It transformed. It turned into boundaries. It turned into clarity. It turned into peace. Because real love, Evan's self-love, doesn't need a partner or a party or a picture-perfect ending. Sometimes it looks like standing alone at the edge of what was and choosing not to go back. Almost a year to the day after the rehearsal dinner, I stood in front of a mirror, straightening my tie. Not for a wedding, not for a date, but for me. I was being interviewed on a live podcast, growing series about emotional healing and resilience. They'd read my essays, seen my videos, and reached out to feature my story. At first I hesitated. I didn't want to be the guy who walked away from his wedding forever. But then I thought, what if someone out there is sitting at a dinner table right now, listening to laughter that feels like betrayal? What if they needed permission to leave? So I said yes. The studio was small but cozy. A warm couch, soft lighting. It's a kind of space that made you feel like the truth could breathe there. The host, a woman named Layla, smiled warmly as she welcomed me. First off, she said, "Thank you for being here. I know it's not easy to share something so personal." "It's okay," I replied. At this point, I'm not ashamed of the truth. It's the pretending that used to wear me down, she nodded. "Let's start with this. What made you walk away?" I paused, not because I didn't know the answer, but because the truth deserved a moment of silence before it arrived. "They mocked my mom," I said, "at the rehearsal dinner, in front of everyone, and the woman I was going to marry laughed. That's when I knew this wasn't a life I could live." Layla leaned in. "What did you feel in that moment?" "Grief," I said, in clarity, all at once. We talked for an hour about grief, love, masculinity, and what it means to value yourself in a world that constantly tells you to perform. Near the end, she asked, "What would you say to someone watching this who's in a relationship that feels off, but they too scared to leave?" I thought for a second, then said, "You don't have to wait for it to get worse to choose yourself. If something feels wrong now, that's enough. You don't need bruises or explosions to justify walking away. Sometimes the slow erosion of your soul is reason enough." When the interview ended, Layla thanked me again. And as I stepped outside into the afternoon light, I realized something. This wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning. Later that night, I went out for dinner with Clara. We didn't talk about the interview. She'd watched it from the control room. She didn't need to ask how I felt. She could read it in the way I held my shoulders, a little taller now. We sat outside on the patio of a small restaurant she loved, string lights above, city hum all around us. Over dessert, she reached across the table and said, "You know, your mom would have been so proud." I swallowed the lump in my throat. I hope so. I know so. I took a breath, the kind that feels like exhaling years of being small, and then softly, "I think she sent you." Clara smiled. "B," she said, "but you had to be ready to find me. Didn't rush anything." There were no labels, no pressure, but one evening, I found myself sitting beside her on my couch, watching the rain paint streaks down the window, and I said, "I'm ready for what?" She asked, "To stop surviving." She leaned into me. "You're already doing it." Clara and I eventually took a trip to the coast, same beach, same stretch of water where ID once stood alone with a locket and a heart full of questions. This time, I wasn't alone. We walked the shore barefoot, hand in hand, the wind warm against our faces. At one point, I stopped and pulled something from my pocket. The locket. "I've been carrying this for a long time," I said. She looked at me, understanding in her eyes. "Do you want to let it go?" I shook my head. "I want to pass it on." And gently, I placed the locket in a small box, one I'd brought with me. I didn't bury it. I didn't throw it in the sea. I just left it on a bench, with a note that read, "For someone who needs to remember that their grief is not a weakness. You are allowed to leave. You are allowed to begin again." As we walked away, Clara squeezed my hand. "You really are the bravest person I know. I'm just finally honest," I said. And maybe that's the same thing. The funny thing about heartbreak is how much space it takes up when it's happening. How little you remember of the actual pain later. What stays is what came after. The rebuilding, the clarity, the way your chest feels when you wake up one day and realize you are free not from love, but from the need to twist yourself into someone else's idea of it. I don't know what's next for me and Clara, and for once I'm okay not knowing, because I'm not chasing forever anymore. I'm choosing truth, and whoever stays in that truth, it's love. So if you're reading this or listening, or watching, and you're still sitting at that table, still waiting for someone to see your pain, let me say what I wish someone had said to me sooner. You, Dan T, have to stay just because you said yes. You don't have to shrink just to be loved. You don't have to wait for them to stop laughing before you stand up. You can leave now. And when you do, you're not breaking a promise. You're keeping one. To yourself. And that is the vow that matters most.